Good afternoon. Welcome to Pay Entry's webinar on the new normal in the workplace. I'm Kathy Graham, and I'm in HR services at Pay Entry. I'm the one that answers your questions if you have them on anything related to HR. That is a part of the service that we provide for all of our clients, so feel free to reach out to me at any time about anything related to human resources. Today, we're going to talk about the new normal in the workplace. And when I don't know how many of you have gone back to work or in the process of going to work in a few weeks, but everyone has their own plan for reopening. Some of the things that we're going to talk about today relate to that opening and what may be different about it and what you need to address. First of all, and this is going to be a big part of the webinar, is ongoing management of health and safety. Then we're going to talk about the development of policies and procedures that reflect the changes in your workforce. We're going to address remote work, whether or not that's a good idea for your company, rethinking facilities and technology, and then redefining how you communicate to wrap this up. Today's webinar is being recorded so that you can access it later on our website. And also, I will be sending a PDF of this presentation to everyone in attendance after the presentation is over. If you have questions, please chat them. Please type them in the chat block below, and I will answer those at the end of this session. Again, thank you for attending. Okay, let's talk about managing health and safety when you go back to work. What you need to do, according to OSHA, is to implement workplace controls. There is something called the General Duty Clause, and all employers are required to comply with this OSHA standard, not just for pandemic purposes, but this is something that on a daily basis employers are required to comply with. So it requires employers to furnish each worker employment and a place of employment which are free from recognized hazards that are causing or likely to cause death or serious physical harm. So that's just a basic statement. You're supposed to offer employees a safe workplace. In implementing workplace controls during this pandemic period, you need to use what they call, or they as in OSHA call a hierarchy of controls to select ways of controlling the hazards in your workplace if there are some. The most effective protection measures are listed from most effective here to least effective. So in engineering controls are the most effective, personal protective equipment being the least effective. We're going to talk about each one of those. So there are advantages and disadvantages to each type of control measure when you're considering how easy it is to implement, how effective it might be, and the cost. Some things cost too much to make a temporary fix. Some things are long-term investments. In most cases, a combination of the measures I've already mentioned will be necessary in one workplace. So let's talk about engineering controls. Engineering controls involve isolating employees from work-related hazards, and so these are types of controls that reduce exposure without relying on the worker's behavior, and they can be the most cost-effective solution to implement. Right now, engineering controls for the pandemic we're in could include installing high-efficiency air filters in your office space, increasing ventilation rates in the work environment, or even installing physical barriers such as clear plastic sneeze guards like you see in the grocery stores now for different areas within your company, depending on the type of company that you have. And also marking the floor with social distancing reminders. If employees are standing in line at the time clock, make sure that you have the floor marked so that they don't stand one behind the other and that they know to keep their distance. So that would be an engineering control. Administrative controls require action by the employee and the employer. This would be changes in work policies or procedures to reduce or minimize exposure to a hazard. So the employee actually has to do something, whereas with the engineering controls, the air around them is being filtered or they're given specific guidance on where to stand, but they don't have to make any kinds of decisions. So here's some examples of administrative controls that you can use in your workforce. Encouraging, number one, sick workers to stay home and having a leave policy or paid time off policy that does encourage these sick workers to stay home. Replacing face-to-face meetings with virtual methods of communication. Implementing work at home where feasible. A lot of us are working at home now, and it does feel more comfortable now than it did when it started, but it is something that is still a little awkward. Establishing alternating days or extra shifts that reduce the total number of employees that you have in your facility at any given time. Discontinuing non-essential travel, developing emergency communication plans, including a forum for answering workers' questions. And we'll talk a little bit more about this when we get into the communication session. Providing workers with up-to-date education and training on the risk factors and protective behaviors and activities. Limit customer and public access to your work site, and communicating availability of medical screening or other worker health resources like your health plan, your employee assistance program, and maybe if you have an on-site nurse or you refer to a particular clinic for your workers' compensation, you can also have them know that that is available to them also. Safe work practices are types of administrative controls that include procedures for working safely to reduce exposure to a hazard, whether it be duration, the frequency of their involvement with the hazard, or the intensity of it. So samples of or examples of safe work practices for COVID-19 include providing resources and an environment at work that promotes personal hygiene. They've given an example here about providing tissues, no-touch trash cans. Use your foot on the trash can instead of pulling the lid up. Hand soap, alcohol-based hand rubs that contain at least 60% alcohol. I know that the off brands are effective. They're normally 62%. Some of the main brands like Purell and those have more like 70% in them, I believe. Disinfectants and disposable towels for workers to clean their work surfaces. You do have to furnish that. Even if it's their desk, you have to furnish it to them. The other thing I'll tell you is that there's a lot of information coming out now that says that the way that this virus is transmitted is less by touching things than actually by breathing things. So, but still requiring regular hand washing or use of the alcohol-based sanitizers is still a good idea. Washing your hands was a good idea before the pandemic because of all the germs in the world, but it is something that is becoming much more common nowadays. And then post hand washing signs in the restrooms. You would think that you would not have to do that, but it is something that is a suggestion. Developing your policies and procedures is going to be a very important part of your coming back to work. Your changes can be addressed by using an addendum to your handbook. So you would call it pandemic policies and procedures. And they would supersede the policies and procedures in your handbook or your policy and procedure manual while this pandemic is in place. Number one, are you going to change the way that you recruit you hire and you onboard staff? What will your procedures be? Or is all of this going to be virtual? I will tell you that right now at PayEntry, we do recruit, we hire and onboard, and we actually train virtually because of the situation that we're in. And it is possible if you are a PayEntry client and you're using our onboarding procedures or our onboarding software, it's called Get Hired. It's hire and onboarding on the bottom left hand of your screen. If you're using that, which is free for most clients, then you should use the onboarding software that we have given you because it's wonderful. I actually was onboarded that way and found it very forward thinking. All of the documents can be uploaded by taking a picture of them with your phone and uploading them into the system. A lot of the documents are already in the system and allow you to do an electronic signatures like your I-9s and things of that nature. So it's awesome. We have an onboarding demo this afternoon actually at 3:30. If you're interested in that, just go to our website, payentry.com, and you can find the log on there. If you can't find it, email me and I will send it to you. You also need to obviously look at your training. As I mentioned, we do ours virtually. And it may be that you have two people working or you have a supervisor that is virtual now. They would just, with the right equipment, be able to go online and share their screen and train someone to do the job. Now, if it's a machine operator, obviously the person may not be able to do that virtually, but whenever possible, do as much as you can virtually if your workforce is still in that state. Your paid time off and your leave benefits need to be looked at because you want to make sure that you have in the temporary or the addendum the fact that for companies that have less than 500 employees, that you would have the leave, emergency leave allowed by the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, FFCRA. It allows the first 10 days to be paid at 100% of pay unless it's child care leave. And then the next 10 weeks will be at a 2/3 pay. So you need to put that temporary policy in this addendum. And then also address if people are coming back to work, are you going to limit the time since they've been off for 2 or 3 months? Are you going to limit the time that when they can use their vacation? If they had vacation stored up before they left, haven't been able to go anywhere, are you going to say, for example, when you come back to work, no vacations can be taken in the first 60 days? Or does that matter to you? So make sure you address all those issues in your paid time off and leave benefits. You also want to address changes that occur or going to occur and you want to incur in employee interaction. Your internal and external meetings for the time being should be virtual whenever possible. That even means your staff meetings. Everyone can sit in their office, go on GoToMeeting or Zoom, and everybody meets in that instead of gathering in a small conference room. Also, when dealing with your vendors, your customers, your visitors, it may be a good idea to limit the number that are in your office and create ways, if they are, to social distance, like only allowing a certain number of people in a conference room and staggering the distance or the chairs between the number of people. But it's very easy to do all of this virtually now, and that means that you're on a computer talking with the person instead of sitting in front of them. Also in your policy and procedures, address changes in how employees report illnesses. Have a policy that requires an employee to notify the company before they come to work if they know it, that they have symptoms of COVID-19 or that they actually are sick. So put in there that they need to tell you before they come to work if at all possible. And if it does happen at work when they start to work, then they need to tell you immediately. Make sure you ha- word it such that they understand that that it's critical that they do that, that it's not, there's no flexibility there, because while they're sitting there with symptoms or the illness, could be infecting other people. So make sure that you're clear that failure to do so can result in disciplinary action, so they know you're serious about it. Also, get them to sign an acknowledgement that they've received and read that policy, so no one can say that they didn't. And then make sure that you put in your policy and procedures how you will protect this information. This is very confidential information that you get from individuals. It's not protected by HIPAA, but it is protected under lots of other oh gosh, confidentiality laws, and it could become an ADA issue. So you want to make very sure that limited number of people have access to the information. You can have a form or doctor's notes or whatever, but keep it separate from the employee's file. Create a separate folder in a separate file cabinet. Address, you're also going to have to address remote work. Some people like it, some people don't. There are a lot of people that would like to continue to work remotely, but you need to determine as the employer which jobs are eligible for remote work. And are these jobs full-time remote or only certain days of the week? Are you just reducing the time that they're in the office and maybe switching them out with other employees who are in on the days when they are not there? Definitely develop some policies for working from home. What you expect from the employees is very important, because you cannot expect them to comply unless they know what your expectations are. Do you want them to have a set schedule that mirror your work hours in the office, or do they have some flexibility there? Um, so make sure that you outline the procedures and policies for home. And that also involves safety, making sure that they have a safe working environment. We talked about that a couple of webinars ago, but we also, I think, mentioned it in this one too. And then train your managers and supervisors to engage remote workers. You know, out of sight, out of mind. They need to have a set schedule for communicating via primarily via phone, some email, but at least once a week touch base with the person that is working remotely to make sure that they still have that connection to the company and that they feel like there is someone there. It's very easy to feel disengaged and basically not unemployed, but that like you don't belong to a company anymore after you start working from home. So make sure that your managers are trained on communicating with remote workers. In addition, provide appropriate technology, equipment, and supplies for those who are. They will need high-speed internet if you expect them to use things like GoToMeeting or Zoom. Does take some different speed sometimes. With everyone bombarding the internet right now, there have been a lot of issues as far as getting online in certain areas of the country. Also, if they need a computer, they don't have one at home, or they need additional monitors because they have those at work, make sure they have those so that their job is just replicates and their equipment replicates what they would have at work. If they need it, you're going to need to find some way to offer them scanning and faxing capabilities depending on the job that they have. I know that we had someone here that requested a printer, and sometimes your printer can scan and fax and do all those things also. So make sure that the needs are met at home. And then an office chair. You know, I sat at my kitchen table for the first 2 months of our working at home. And my kitchen chairs don't have any cushions on them. And I will tell you that it is not ergonomically right to sit for 8 hours or more a day in a kitchen chair. So I um, went to the office and got my office chair and brought it home. Um, and you know, you can have them sign out equipment, or you can just ship it to them. Also develop measurements to ensure that the productivity at home equals your standards. They're not, you know, you still need the productivity to be as high as it is when you're in the office. So make sure you have standards and employees understand those standards. Reinforce your cybersecurity measures with policies and software. That's readily available nowadays. We work off of a VPN, which is a virtual private network, and logging into that allows you extra security. Address your safety issues with a checklist for the employee that you develop for a home office. For example, wires on the floor. Do they have to walk across a wire on the floor in order to get to the other side of their desk? So just things like that that you would not let them have it. I mean, too many cords in one outlet, that kind of thing. Things you wouldn't allow at work, you don't allow at home um, at the same time. And then a lot of companies are doing this now. I have a feeling that the corporate office space market is going to be wide open, and it might get a little cheaper because the companies are deciding that maybe they can be virtual. Reconsider the amount of office space that you need for predominantly a virtual workforce. So if you don't need as much office space, this is a way to cut back on your expenses and still conduct business normally. You could also redesign your office layout that you have now to provide more distance between employees. Look at making one-way traffic patterns in your halls. Take a look at your conference rooms. Do you really need them? If you can't put a lot of people in them, can they be converted to extra large office space for someone that needs a special accommodation? And there are people, we didn't talk about this today, we talked about it, I think the last time we did this type of a survey, our session, is that there are some people coming back to the workplace that are at higher risk of being infected, and those may need special accommodations. I'll be happy to send you some information on that or answer any questions you might have about those types of people. Someone with an immune system that is not up to speed, and someone that just had surgery or a baby or is pregnant, those kind of employees. And then you may want to rework your employee common areas, your break rooms, your kitchen. Um, there need to be rules about how many people sit at a table. If that's the case, rework the number of tables, the number of chairs available. Um, Thoughts about the whether or not you're going to offer refrigerators and microwaves as you did before. So just think about the exposures and talk to your employees about this too, and your supervisors. Find out what they think would be a reasonable effort on your part to rework those common areas. And redefine how you communicate. Consider all the changes in your workforce. You've got remote versus on-site, potentially staggered shifts or work days, and you may have reconfigured your supervision levels because people are working. You need to supervise. If you're staggering shifts, that might make a 12 to 14-hour day for a supervisor, so you may have to reconfigure the supervision that you have. But just take a step back and look at those to make sure that you have what it takes to make communication successful. Remote workers need to be communicated with on the same frequency that your on-site employees do. And then formalize the process of addressing questions from employees. First of all, make sure you're relying on the experts for answers to your questions. There's CDC, OSHA, and the Department of Labor all have great websites. You can certainly call me for any information that you need. We have a ton of information on COVID and all the forums, et cetera, that involve or revolve around it. Implement a formal system of response. Don't let it be hit or miss. Let one person be where the questions come in and the answers go out, so that you have some control over monitoring what kind of questions are coming in and that the questions are answered, because you need to communicate quickly and openly about issues. Address fears quickly. Some people are afraid to go back to work. Truly, because they may have a depressed immune system, but and some are afraid to come back to work, but they will still go to the grocery store without a mask. So you have different levels of fears and different reasons for fears, but you need to address those quickly. Don't dismiss them. Talk to the person, and if it is someone that has an existing condition that makes them more vulnerable, please reach out to me and I'll help you talk through what you would need to do with this individual. And then create a formal time frame and a method for communicating to all employees. Employees need to stay connected. We have an 11 a.m. all company chat every day. It doesn't last long, but it does keep us connected. And I think that we communicate better now than we did when we were in the office, because you can access people and through many things. We use Teams here. We access people that way, but it does connect your employees to you. And if you are working virtually or people are sitting further apart, management's not around or whatever, it does give them the opportunity to feel like they are still a part of your organization. It also gives management a platform for communicating any updates to policies, any company information that's going on, and any issues that have come up. Um, the it's an important. This is an important vehicle for keeping your individual employees connected and feeling engaged. So, the new normal in the workplace, this thing is not a short-term fix right now. We don't know when things will return to what we used to call normal, and it may never go back to the way it was. Hopefully, masks in the workplace and 6 feet apart will eventually go away. And I think when there's a vaccine, that's when we'll see some progression there. So it is not forever. And you need to make your employees understand that it's not forever. It is until there's a vaccine in place or some other reasonable efforts that have been made to slow down the spread of the virus. And advice and direction from us will change as this pandemic evolves. If we see things coming out from the CDC or OSHA, we will communicate them through webinars and other methods. So stay tuned, because these will change. Okay, does anyone have any questions? You can type them in the chat. And you can also email me afterwards. It's cgram@payentry.com. So if there are no questions, this will end our presentation today. And I hope that you got something out of it. I will be sending you the written version of it so that you can go back over it. And it looks like we do have a couple of questions now. There's someone, if you could finish your question, it says, wondering if you can address the legal requirements of providing, but there's nothing after providing. And what if an employee, I'm sorry, here it is. What are the legal requirements of providing protective gear for employees? You do not have to furnish it unless you require it. If you require it in the workplace, you do have to furnish it and pay for it. And another, what if an employee took a leave and their position got absorbed? Um, that depends on the size of your company. If you have more than 50 employees, you are required, and certain other things apply, then FMLA may come into place and you would not be able to replace that person, so you would need to bring them back to work. So Rafi, if you want to send me an email, we can talk through that and see if that's the case. And Rafi says you have 8 employees, so you do not have to do anything. If they were replaced, um, that you are not required to hold their job unless um, you may have been required to hold their job under the FFCRA emergency paid sick leave. If you would, Rafi, I will get in touch with you after this, and we'll talk about the situation and how long it lasts, how long the leave lasted. So I'll chat with you after this. The legal requirements for distancing and face masks, there are no legal requirements that if you bring your employees back to work, that you have to practice social distancing or face masks. But if you don't do something, your employees may not feel safe at work. If they feel that there is a threat to them in the workplace, that they could catch it from someone they're sitting next to, OSHA would enter into that and they could file a charge against you under OSHA, and they would come in and audit your work environment. So OSHA would be the department that would, of the government, that would look at the situation and decide whether or not the workplace included a direct threat to catching the virus. If an employee is uncomfortable coming back to the workplace, do you have to find them something virtual? No, you do not. Some jobs aren't done well virtually. If they're uncomfortable coming back to the workplace, they need to explain to you why they're uncomfortable. If it is, let's say, for example, someone has a depressed immune system because they've had cancer treatments, what you would do if that job is not good as a virtual job, you would bring them in the office and put them in their own office instead of a cubicle. You could put them further away from other staff. Then you have everyone else 6 feet apart. You could put them 12 feet apart. So there are things that you can do in the workplace if someone is not comfortable coming back. That also applies to people that you've laid off. If they don't want to come back, a lot of them don't want to come back right now because they're making more money on unemployment. That's another issue, and we can talk about that if you're interested. Just send me an email, but there are some rules about that. But if it's because there's something they have, let's just say they're 65 years old and they feel like they have more of a threat, then you can just honestly address that by the situation that you bring them back into and how you office them. Another question, what was the name of the government service subsidizing PTO and leave again? That actually was a law that came out in March, the Family First Protection, gosh, it's FFCRA, Family First Coronavirus Response Act. So it is a law. And if you'd like some information on that, Jeremy, just email me and I will send you an overview of it. But it's for any company, and it is mandatory. It's for any company that has less than 500 employees, has to provide paid leave for illness and childcare, but there is a direct offset in taxes for the employer, so 100% tax credit on it. Hassan, yes. Are you familiar with the exceptions for companies with 50 employees and fewer to the FFCRA? It's actually 25 employees and under. Yes, you need to request that exception from the Department of Labor. You cannot just assume that it applies or can apply to you, but for small business, very small businesses, there are ways around complying with that leave. So a question, if we sent home an employee with fever, are we required to pay the employee in full, or can we deduct it from their PTO? That would be up to the employee. If they want to be paid out of their PTO, you are, if you have if it's COVID-19 related, you are required to pay them under the FFCRA. So you're required to pay them for the first 10 days in full. So if you send them home, you wouldn't be deducting it from their PTO. You would be paying them out of that FFCRA fund. And if you need more information on that, Esther, please let me know. I'll send it to you. Okay, any other questions? I hope you found this helpful today. I am going to have another one next week, next Thursday at 2 o'clock on Eastern Standard Time. We're going to talk about disasters, as though pandemic is not enough. So tune in next week to our webinar on natural disasters. Thanks for coming and have a great afternoon.